The room is still breathing. I need you to understand that before anything else. Whatever I'm about to describe, the motel, the door, the sound through the ceiling, what the clerk told me, what I found in the binder, none of it is over. Room 204 at the Hargate Motor Lodge is breathing right now. In the walls of an apartment it's never been inside. Through surfaces it shouldn't be able to reach, and I can hear it when I'm quiet enough, which is why I don't let myself get quiet anymore. My name is Nora Vasquez. I'm 31. I'm a traveling large animal veterinary technician, cattle and horses, mostly working contracts across rural Wyoming, Montana, and the western Dakotas. I've slept in 400 motel rooms in 6 years. I've slept in rooms where the deadbolt was missing, where the carpet was wet, and no one could tell me why, where the walls were so thin I could hear a stranger brushing their teeth. None of those rooms bothered me. Unfamiliar places are where I live. They're the only home I've had since I started this work. Room 204 was not an unfamiliar place. It felt familiar the moment I stood outside its door. It was warm where it shouldn't have been warm. It was silent in the wrong way. Not empty silence, but held silence. The kind that happens when something that was making noise stops because it heard you coming. I touched the door. I shouldn't have touched the door. That was the read. That was the moment it started. And it hasn't stopped. And I am telling you this not because I've accepted what's happening, but because I am angry enough to put it on record. And I think the anger is the only thing the room can't file. I think that's why it's waiting. The contract that brought me through that part of Wyoming was a 3-week bovine respiratory workup for a cattle operation outside of KC. Good money, better than most of my jobs, but the schedule was brutal. I was running blood panels on 200, head across 4 pasture sections, which meant early mornings, long drives between gates, and evenings spent logging lab submissions in my truck with a thermos of coffee and no cell signal. The ranch didn't have bunkhouse space for outside contractors, so I'd been staying at a place in KC proper, a 12-unit motel run by a woman named Gail, who left the office unlocked and trusted you to leave cash in the drawer if you checked in after 9. Small town system. It worked fine. On October 11th, I finished late, later than I should have. One of the heifers in the south pasture had a reaction to the blood draw, not dangerous, just prolonged, and by the time I'd stabilized her, packed my kit, and driven back to the county road, it was past 11. KC was 40 minutes north. I was tired in the way that makes your vision flatten, where the road starts looking like a photograph of a road instead of the real thing. I knew I shouldn't drive 40 minutes in that state. I pulled over at a wide spot near a ranch gate and checked my phone. No signal, but I had an offline map loaded with one of those Atlas apps that stores highway data for areas without coverage. I scrolled south and east, looking for anything closer than Casey. There was a town marker about 12 miles ahead. Not a town I'd heard of. The marker just said Hargate, and beneath it, in the app's sparse notation system, a small bed icon indicating lodging. 12 miles, 15 minutes. I could handle that. The road to Hargate was a 2-lane state highway that dropped off the plateau into a shallow valley, the kind of road where the land opens up on both sides, and you can see weather coming from 40 miles away. That night, there was no weather, just black sky, hard stars, and the feeling you get in open country at night, that the earth is bigger than it should be, that there's too much of it, and that you're the only thing on it that has a heartbeat. Hargate appeared as a cluster of lights at the bottom of the valley, and I use the word cluster generously. There were maybe 6 or 7 visible light sources total. A gas station with a single overhead fluorescent, closed. A post office, dark. A grain elevator with a security light on its north face, and set back from the highway by about 50 yards, partially obscured by a row of leafless cottonwoods. A 2-story L-shaped building with a lit sign that read Hargate Motor Lodge in blocky serif letters, half the bulbs dead, the rest casting an orange glow that didn't reach the parking lot. The lot was empty, completely empty. No cars, no trucks, no trailers, just cracked asphalt and painted lines so faded they were more suggestion than marking. I almost kept driving. Something about the emptiness registered in a part of my brain that I've learned to trust, the same part that tells me when a horse is about to kick or when a fence line has been cut. Not a thought, a signal, a pre-verbal recognition that something in the environment doesn't match the pattern it should. But I was tired, and it was a motel, and I've stayed in worse. I parked near the office, which was on the ground floor at the corner of the L. The door was glass, lit from inside by a single desk lamp. I could see a counter, a pegboard with keys, a rack of brochures that hadn't been touched in years. I pushed the door open. A bell chimed, an actual brass bell on a string, not electronic. No one came. I waited, tapped the counter, said, "Hello?" twice, looked for a bell to ring and found one, a small chrome service bell next to a cup of pens. I pressed it. The sound was sharp and clean and seemed to travel further than it should have, not just through the office, but up, into the ceiling, as if the building itself were conducting it. A man appeared from a door behind the counter, not quickly. He didn't rush. He simply materialized in the doorway the way people do when they've been standing just out of sight, waiting for a specific prompt. He was in his 60s, maybe older, tall, thin, with the kind of posture that suggests a lifetime of physical work followed by a long decline. He wore a flannel shirt buttoned to the throat and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. His face was neutral, not unfriendly, not welcoming, just present. "Need a room," I said. He looked at me for a moment. Then he looked past me, through the glass door, at my truck in the lot. "Just you?" "Just me." He turned to the pegboard. There were 12 hooks on it, arranged in 2 rows of 6. Most of them held keys, actual metal keys on plastic diamond-shaped fobs with room numbers stamped into them. He reached for the first hook on the bottom row. "Room 107, he said. "Ground floor, end of the east wing, 42 a night." "That's fine." He set the key on the counter. I paid cash. He wrote something in a ledger, not a computer, an actual paper ledger, the kind with green lines and a cloth binding. I watched him write my name, the date, the room number, and the amount. His handwriting was meticulous. Every letter was formed completely, with no shortcuts or abbreviations. "Checkout's at 10, he said. "No exceptions. If you're staying past 10, come to the office before 9, and I'll extend it. I'll be out early, probably 6. He nodded. Then he paused, and for the first time, something in his expression shifted. Not dramatically. His mouth tightened by a fraction. His eyes moved from the ledger to my face. "You'll hear the building at night," he said. I waited for him to continue. "Old construction, wood frame, plaster walls. When the temperature drops after midnight, the framing contracts. Sounds like movement. People sometimes think there's someone in the hall or in the room above them. There isn't. It's just the building cooling." "Okay," I said. I mention it because I've had guests call me at 2 in the morning concerned about noise upstairs. I'd rather set the expectation now. I appreciate that. I sleep through most things. He held my gaze for one more moment. Then he slid the ledger beneath the counter and said goodnight. Room 107 was exactly what I expected. Queen bed, thin comforter, nightstand with a lamp that worked on the second try, a bathroom with a shower stall and a bar of soap still in its wrapper. The carpet was old, but clean. The walls were the pale yellow of every budget motel built before 1990. There was a painting above the bed, not a print, an actual painting, oil on canvas, of a wheat field under a gray sky. It was competent but joyless, the kind of art that exists to fill a rectangle. I dropped my bag, washed my face, plugged in my phone even though there was no signal to receive, and got into bed. The sheets were cold and smelled like detergent. I turned off the lamp. The building settled into silence for about 20 minutes. At 12:15, I checked the clock on the nightstand. I heard the first sound from the second floor. The clerk had warned me. Temperature contraction, wood framing. I told myself that, and I believed it, because the sound was exactly what he'd described. A slow creak, the kind of noise old houses make, structural and impersonal. It came from directly above my room, a single long groan of wood adjusting to cold air. Then it came again, same spot, same duration, same pitch, and again, at regular intervals. Every 30 seconds, give or take, a creak, a pause, a creak, a pause. Rhythmic, consistent, mechanical in its regularity. Buildings don't contract rhythmically. I grew up in a wood frame house in eastern Oregon. I know what thermal settling sounds like. It's irregular, clustered, unpredictable. A pop here, a groan there, minutes of silence, then 3 sounds in a row. It doesn't keep time. This was keeping time. I lay in bed and listened for 10 full minutes. The interval never varied. Creak, 30 seconds, creak, 30 seconds, creak, coming from one fixed point in the ceiling, directly above the head of my bed. I told myself it was a mechanical system, a fan, a water heater cycling, some piece of equipment on a timer, expanding and contracting with each activation. I'd heard stranger things in motel walls, but at 12:40, the sound changed. It didn't stop. It expanded. The single creak became a sequence creak, then a softer sound, then another creak from a slightly different position, then the softer sound again. The softer sound was what made me sit up in bed and put my feet on the floor. It was an exhale, not a hiss, not a pipe, not air moving through a vent. An exhale, the kind of sound a chest makes when it releases air slowly through a partially open mouth. Organic, moist, alive, creak, exhale, creak, exhale. The sound was coming from room 204, directly above me, a room in an empty motel with an empty parking lot in a town that barely existed, and something in that room was breathing. I sat on the edge of the bed with my boots in my hands, and I did something I'm not proud of, and not ashamed of either, because it was the only rational response. I considered leaving. I considered putting on my boots, walking to my truck, and driving 40 minutes to KC in the dark, with flat vision and aching eyes, because whatever was happening above me was not thermal contraction, and the clerk had known that when he warned me. But I didn't leave. And the reason I didn't leave is the reason I'm telling this story, the reason everything that happened afterward happened at all. I didn't leave because I was angry, not scared, angry. I was angry at the idea that a motel clerk had lied to my face with a prepared explanation, that he'd rehearsed it, that he'd delivered it with just enough fatherly concern to make it sound reasonable, and that he'd assumed I would accept it the way every other guest had accepted it, and just put a pillow over my head. I put on my boots. I opened the door of room 107 and stepped into the ground floor corridor. The air was cold and still and smelled like old carpet and something else, something faintly sweet, like dried flowers or the inside of a cedar chest that's been closed for years. At the far end of the corridor, a staircase led to the second floor. I walked toward it. The staircase was narrow, uncarpeted, and lit by a single bulb in a frosted wall sconce at the landing. The steps were wood-old growth, probably original to the building, and they announced every footfall with a sound that traveled in both directions, down into the ground floor corridor behind me, and up into whatever waited at the top. I wasn't trying to be quiet. I was past quiet. I wanted whatever was in room 204 to know I was coming, and I wanted the clerk to know I was going up, and I wanted this entire building to understand that I was not the kind of person who puts a pillow over her head. The second floor hallway was identical in layout to the one below, a long corridor running the length of the east wing, doors on the left side, a window at the far end overlooking the parking lot. Same carpet, same wall color, same brass room numbers screwed to each door, rooms 201 through 206. But it was different up here. The air was heavier, not warmer. I want to be precise about that, but denser. The way air feels before a storm when the barometric pressure drops and everything seems to weigh slightly more than it should. And there was a smell, not the cedar chest sweetness from the ground floor. This was closer to paper, old paper, the kind you find in boxes that have been stored in an attic for decades yellowed and brittle, and exhaling the faint chemical ghost of whatever ink was used on them. The breathing was louder. Standing in the second-floor hallway, I could hear it clearly. It was coming from room 204, third door on the left, and it was unmistakable now, not a building sound, not a mechanical cycle, but respiration. Slow, deep, and steady. Inhale, pause, exhale, pause. The rhythm of something at rest, something sleeping, or something pretending to sleep. I stood in front of room 204 and put my hand on the door. The wood was warm. Not the warmth of a heated room bleeding through. I'd touched enough motel doors to know the difference. This was warmth from the surface itself, like the door had been absorbing body heat from the other side. I held my palm flat against it for 3 seconds. The warmth didn't dissipate. If anything, it deepened, as if the door were leaning into my hand. I tried the knob. Locked. Deadbolted from the inside, which meant the knob turned but the door caught after a 1/4 inch. Someone had locked this room from within. I knocked, not loudly. 2 solid knocks, the kind you'd give a neighbor's door at a reasonable hour. The breathing stopped, not gradually, instantly, like a recording being paused. One moment the room was full of slow, measured respiration, and the next it was silent, with a completeness that felt aggressive, as if the silence were pushing back against the door, pressing into the hallway, filling the space where the sound had been with something heavier than quiet. I stood there for 30 seconds, 45, a full minute, nothing. No breathing, no movement, no creak. Room 204 was holding its breath, and I had the overwhelming, irrational sense that it was listening to me the way I had been listening to it. I went back downstairs. The office was dark. The desk lamp had been turned off, and through the glass door, I could see that the space behind the counter was empty. The clerk was gone, not in a back room, not sleeping in a chair, but gone. The door behind the counter that he'd emerged from was closed, and when I tried the office's front door, it was locked. Not from the inside with a thumb turn, but with a key, the way you'd lock a building you were leaving for the night. I went back to room 107. I sat on the bed. I picked up the motel phone on the nightstand and pressed 0 for the front desk. It rang 11 times and no one answered. Here's where I should tell you what a reasonable person would do, because I know what you're thinking, and you're right. A reasonable person would leave. A reasonable person would get in their truck and drive away and find a different motel, or sleep in the cab or pull over in a church parking lot and deal with a stiff neck in the morning. A reasonable person wouldn't stay in a building where a locked room breathes and a clerk disappears and nothing about the situation suggests anything other than wrongness. But I want to tell you what I actually did and why. I stayed. I stayed because something about the way the breathing had stopped when I knocked that instantaneous silence, that deliberate pause, made me feel like I had interrupted something. Like my presence in the hallway had disrupted a process, and my continued presence in the building was a form of interference that whatever was happening in room 204 could not easily work around. I had the sense, and I know this sounds arrogant or irrational or both, that as long as I was awake and paying attention, the room couldn't finish what it was doing. So I stayed awake. I sat in the chair by the window in room 107, and I listened. At 1:30 a.m., the breathing resumed. Same rhythm, same depth, same origin point directly above me, room 204, third door on the left. But there was something new, layered beneath it now. Between the inhales and the exhales, in the brief pause where the breath turned, I could hear something papery, a rustling, not loud enough to identify precisely, but consistent enough to be intentional, like pages being turned, one at a time, synchronized with the breathing cycle. Inhale, page, exhale, pause, inhale, page, exhale, pause. Whatever was in room 204 was reading. I sat in that chair for the next 4 hours, and I listened to it read. I didn't sleep. I didn't try to go upstairs again. I just sat and tracked the rhythm and noticed the things that changed within it. The pace of the page turning increased slightly after 3 a.m., as if the reader were moving through denser material. Around 3:45, the breathing deepened and slowed, and the pages stopped for nearly 15 minutes before resuming at a faster rate. At 4:20, something heavy was set down, not dropped, placed on a surface directly above my head. The ceiling creaked once with the weight of it, and then the breathing stopped, and the room was silent. And this time, the silence didn't feel aggressive. It felt finished. I checked the clock. 4:22 a.m. I waited until 5 o'clock, heard nothing more, and then I did something I'd been planning since 1:30. I went to the office. The office door was unlocked now. The desk lamp was on. The space behind the counter was still empty, but the ledger was out, open to a page I hadn't seen the night before. I stepped behind the counter, something I wouldn't normally do, but this had stopped being a normal motel transaction hours ago, and I looked at what was open. It wasn't a guest log, or rather, it was, but it wasn't the page where the clerk had written my name. He'd opened it to a section near the middle of the book, 40 or 50 pages in, where the entries were older. The handwriting was different, multiple hands, some careful, some hurried, and the format was different too. Instead of name, date, room number, and amount, these entries had 5 columns: name, date, room number, duration, and a final column with a header. I had to tilt the book to read because the ink had faded. The header said, "Condition at departure." I scanned the entries. Most of the names meant nothing to me. The dates ranged from the mid-1990s to what appeared to be about 5 years ago. The room numbers varied: 102, 105, 201, 203, but room 204 appeared more than any other. 12 entries for room 204 across approximately 20 years of records. The duration column was what stopped me. Most motel stays are measured in nights. 1 night, 2 nights, a week at most. The durations listed for room 204 were measured in months. The earliest entry, room 204, 14 months. Another, from 2003, room 204, 22 months. The most recent, dated 5 years ago, room 204, 31 months. 31 months, nearly 3 years. Someone had occupied room 204 for nearly 3 years. I looked at the condition at departure column for these entries. Most of the other rooms had simple notations: satisfactory, no damage, standard cleaning. The room 204 entries were different. They didn't describe the condition of the room, they described the condition of the guest. Room 204, 14 months departed ambulatory. Declined forwarding address. No possessions remaining. Room 204, 22 months. Departed non-ambulatory. Transferred to county care. No next of kin identified. Room required no cleaning. Room 204, 31 months, did not depart. See supplemental. That last one, did not depart, see supplemental, was the final entry for room 204 in the ledger. After it, the remaining pages were blank. Whatever had been logged about room 204's most recent long-term occupant had been moved to a supplemental record that wasn't in this book. I closed the ledger and looked at the pegboard behind the counter. 12 hooks, 2 rows of 6. My key was gone. I had it in my pocket. All the other keys were present, hanging on their hooks, their diamond-shaped fobs dusty and still, except 204. The hook for room 204 was empty. No key, no fob, no dust mark. The hook itself was bent slightly downward, as if something heavier than a key had been hanging from it. I heard footsteps behind me. The clerk was standing in the doorway behind the counter, the same door he'd appeared from the night before. He was wearing the same flannel shirt, buttoned to the throat, and his glasses were still pushed up on his forehead, and he was looking at me with an expression that was not anger and not surprise, but something closer to resignation. The way a doctor looks when a patient asks about a diagnosis the doctor was hoping to avoid. "You went upstairs," he said, not a question. "I went upstairs." He stepped past me, closed the ledger, and slid it beneath the counter in the same motion he'd used the night before. Practiced. Automatic. Most guests don't go upstairs. Most guests don't hear a room breathing. He looked at me then, directly, without the avoidance I'd expected. His eyes were tired, but they were clear, and what I saw in them wasn't guilt or deception. It was exhaustion of a particular kind, the exhaustion of someone who has explained something true to people who cannot hear it so many times that the act of explanation has become its own form of suffering. "I told you the building makes noise when it cools," he said. "That's not what that was." "No," he said, "it's not." He reached beneath the counter, not where the ledger was, but further back, near the wall, and pulled out a binder. Not new, not old. A standard 3-ring binder with a dark green cover, the kind used for operational manuals or policy documents. He set it on the counter between us. "My name is Carol Pruitt," he said. "I have managed this property for 19 years. Before me, my father managed it for 23. Before him, it was built and operated by a man named Dale Hargate, who opened it in 1961 and ran it until 1979, at which point he moved into room 204 and did not leave." He opened the binder. "This is the supplemental record that the ledger references. It is not a guest log. It is a record of the room, what it does, what it requires, and what happens to the people who stay in it too long." The binder was organized with tab dividers, each tab labeled with a year range. The first section covered 1979 to 1985. I didn't read every page. There were dozens, but I read enough to understand the structure. Each entry was written in a different hand by a different person, and each described the same room from the perspective of someone who had either stayed in it or managed the property while someone else did. The earliest entries were written by Carol's father. They were factual, clipped, almost clinical. 1979. Dale Hargate moved into 204 following sale of residential property. Paid monthly rate. No unusual behavior initially. After approximately 4 months, began reporting that the room knew his schedule, said the room adjusted temperature based on when he planned to sleep. I attributed this to the building's old thermostat system, which is unreliable. 1980. Hargate no longer leaves the room for meals. Groceries delivered to the door are taken inside, but packaging is never discarded. Room generates no trash. Hargate's speech has changed. He speaks about the room in second person, as if addressing it directly. He refers to the room as you. He does not appear distressed. He appears settled. 1981. Attempted welfare check. Room was locked from inside. Hargate responded through the door. Voice was his, but cadence was different. Slower. Words spaced evenly. When asked if he needed assistance, he said, "The room is reading me, and I am letting it. I contacted county services. They sent someone." Hargate would not open the door. No legal basis for forced entry. Case closed. The entries continued year by year, tracking Hargate's slow disappearance into the room he'd built. By 1983, he no longer responded through the door. By 1984, the room had begun breathing. Carol's father documented it plainly. Room 204 has developed an audible respiration pattern. Begins after midnight. Ceases before dawn. Not mechanical, not plumbing. The room is breathing, and I can no longer attribute it to the building structure. The final entry in the first section was dated 1985. Hargate has not been seen or heard in 11 months. Room remains locked from inside. Key is not on the pegboard. I have a master, but I will not use it. The breathing is louder now, and it has changed. There is a secondary sound, pages turning. I believe the room is processing something. I believe it is reading the way Hargate said it was reading him, except now Hargate is not separate from the room. He is what the room is reading. I looked up from the binder. Carol was watching me. His hands were flat on the counter, palms down, the way someone braces themselves before delivering news. "The room doesn't just house people," he said. "It reads them, their routines, their patterns, their habits, their histories. It takes its time, months, usually, sometimes years. The breathing is how you know it's active. The pages are how you know it's working. And when it's finished, the person is part of the room. Not dead, not gone, part of it. The room becomes a record of them, and they become a function of the room. What does that mean, a function of the room? It means room 204 doesn't need a furnace. It doesn't need wiring. The lights in that room work without being connected to the building's electrical. The lock engages without a key. The temperature adjusts itself based on whoever is inside it, because Hargate is still in there, and he's been maintaining it from the inside for over 40 years. I closed the binder. The paper smell I'd noticed in the second-floor hallway was stronger now, as if the act of reading the binder had released it, or as if the building recognized what I was doing and was leaning closer. The guests in the ledger, I said. The ones with the long stays in 204. They didn't choose to stay that long. Some of them did, at first. The room is comfortable. More than comfortable, it adjusts. It learns your preferences before you express them. The pillow firmness changes overnight. The water temperature is always exactly right. The light through the window shifts to match your sleep cycle. People who stay in that room feel more rested than they've felt in years. They extend one night to two to a week to a month. By the time they realize the room is learning them, actually cataloging them, they don't want to leave, because no other room in any other building will ever feel that precisely calibrated to who they are. And the ones who did leave, Carol's hands pressed harder against the counter. The ones who left early, within the first few weeks, were fine, disoriented for a few days, trouble sleeping in other places, a feeling of being watched that fades after a month or so. But the ones who stayed longer, he paused. The room had already read too much of them. They left, but they left incomplete. Parts of their patterns, their habits, their memories. The room kept those, filed them. The people who left after 6 months or more described the same thing, a feeling of having been partially erased. Not their identity, not their name, but the texture of their life, the way they took their coffee, the route they drove to work, the sound of their mother's voice, small things, specific things, the details that make a person feel like themselves. The room kept those, and the people never got them back. He reached across the counter and took the binder, closed it, held it against his chest. "You were in the hallway last night," he said. "You knocked on the door. The room heard you. It stopped breathing because it was assessing whether you were coming in. When you went back downstairs, it resumed. But you need to understand, it noticed you. You stood close enough and long enough for it to begin a preliminary read. It's not finished. It's barely started. But it has a sample now, and it will compare that sample against every person who enters this building from now on, looking for a match. A match for what? For whatever it read in you that it found interesting. The room doesn't take everyone. It's selective. It compiles partial reads from hundreds of guests, and it waits sometimes years for someone whose pattern is complete enough to be worth the full process." He put the binder back beneath the counter. "Check out," he said. "Now, don't go upstairs. Don't touch the door of 204 again. And when you leave this building, don't come back. Not because I'm telling you not to, but because the room will recognize your truck, and if you park in that lot again, it will know. And the preliminary read will resume from where it stopped." I looked at him for a long time. My anger was still there. It had been there all night, a hot wire running through my chest. But it had shifted. I wasn't angry at Carol anymore. I was angry at the room, and at the building, and at the idea that something could start reading you without your permission, and that the act of proximity was consent enough. "You manage this place," I said. "You've managed it for 19 years. You live here. I live in a trailer behind the building. I haven't been above the ground floor since 2014. Why do you stay?" His expression changed for the first time since I'd met him. The resignation cracked, and underneath it was something rawer. "Because if I leave, no one manages the room. No one warns the guests. No one makes sure the door stays locked. And the room doesn't need a manager to operate, but it needs one to be selective. Without me, it reads everyone." I picked up my bag. I left cash for the room on the counter. I walked out of the office and into the gray morning light, and I got in my truck, and I sat behind the wheel, and I looked up at the second floor of the Hargate Motor Lodge. Room 204's window was directly above where I'd parked, and in that window, I am certain of this, I was looking directly at it in full daylight. The curtain moved, not from wind, not from a draft. It moved the way fabric moves when someone standing behind it shifts their weight, a slow, settling adjustment, and then stillness. I started the engine and pulled out of the lot. That should be the end of this story. I wish it were. I drove to KC. I checked into Gail's motel. I slept for 3 hours and went back to work on the ranch. And for the rest of that day, I told myself it was over. I'd spent one night in a strange building. I'd heard strange sounds. I'd read a binder full of unverifiable claims from a man who'd lived alone beside an empty motel for 2 decades. And now I was back in my routine, and the whole thing was behind me. But it wasn't behind me. It was in front of me, waiting in a place I hadn't looked yet. The first sign came that night, in Gail's motel. I'd stayed there a dozen times. Same room 4, ground floor, closest to the ice machine. I knew its sounds. I knew the way the heater clicked on at intervals, the way the parking lot light cast a yellow stripe across the ceiling through the gap in the curtains, the way the mattress had a dip on the left side that I'd learned to avoid. I knew this room the way you know any temporary space you've returned to enough times, not intimately, but reliably. That night, the room felt wrong, not threatening, not supernatural, just fractionally incorrect, like a photograph that's been shifted 1 degree off level. The heater clicked at the same intervals, but the click sounded different, thinner, more distant, as if the heater were further away than it actually was. The parking lot light still cast its stripe across the ceiling, but the stripe was narrower and the yellow was colder. The mattress dip was on the right side instead of the left. I told myself I was misremembering. Exhaustion and stress will do that. They erode your confidence in your own pattern recognition, make you second-guess details you've never questioned before. I adjusted to the right side dip, closed my eyes, and tried to sleep. At 12:15 a.m., I heard breathing, not from above, not from another room, from the walls, from the structure of the building itself, a low, rhythmic respiration that seemed to come from every surface, simultaneously, the ceiling, the floor, the drywall behind the headboard. Inhale, pause, exhale, pause. The same cadence I'd heard in room 204, transposed into a different building entirely. I sat up. The breathing continued for approximately 90 seconds, then stopped, not gradually, abruptly, the way it had stopped when I'd knocked on 204's door, as if whatever was producing it had become aware that I was listening. The room settled back into its normal sounds. The heater clicked. The parking lot light held steady, but the mattress dip was on the left side again, where it had always been, and I lay there in the dark, knowing that something had just tested a signal and found the frequency. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next day, I called Carol Pruitt. I'd taken a business card from the office, just a white card with the motel name and a phone number, no address, no website, and I'd kept it in my wallet without knowing why. He answered on the second ring. Hargate Motor Lodge. It's Nora Vasquez. I stayed there 2 nights ago. Room 107. Silence. Not the empty silence of a deadline, but the full silence of someone choosing their next words very carefully. You should not be calling this number, he said. Something happened last night, in a different motel, 40 miles from your building. I heard the same breathing, more silence. Then quietly, where are you now? KC, are you in the room where you heard it? No, I'm in my truck, outside the ranch. Good. Don't go back to that room. Find a different one. Different motel if you can. Different room at minimum. Why? Because the read didn't stop when you left. I told you it took a sample. The sample isn't just biological. It isn't fingerprints or DNA or anything physical. It's spatial. The room reads how you occupy space, how you sleep, how you breathe, how your weight distributes on a mattress, how your body interacts with a room's geometry. It builds a profile, and once it has enough data, it can project that profile into any enclosed space you occupy. You're telling me room 204 can reach me in a different building. I'm telling you, room 204 has already reached you. The breathing you heard wasn't the room trying to find you. It was the room confirming that it had. I sat in my truck in the ranch parking area, and I watched cattle graze in the south pasture, and I tried to reconcile what Carol was telling me with anything I understood about the way the world works. I couldn't. So I asked the only question that mattered. How do I stop it? You don't stop it. You degrade the sample. The read is based on your patterns, the specific way you exist inside a room. If you change those patterns enough, the sample becomes unreliable. Sleep in different positions. Alter your breathing rhythm before you fall asleep. Rearrange the furniture. Don't establish a routine in any room you stay in. The room is looking for consistency. If you deny it consistency, the sample degrades over time. Over how much time? Months, maybe longer. It depends on how much it read during your initial contact. You were in the hallway for how long? A few minutes, maybe 5. And you touched the door. Yes, he exhaled. It was a long, controlled breath, and I hated that I noticed its rhythm. Touching the door is direct contact with the room's boundary. That's a deeper read than proximity alone. The door is how the room interfaces with the hallway. It's a membrane. When you put your hand on it, you gave the room a much more detailed sample than if you just stood nearby. You could have told me this before I left. I told you not to touch the door. I told you to check out. You had already made contact, and the best thing I could do was get you away from the building before the room tried to extend the read. Every minute you spent in that building after touching the door was additional data. I finished the ranch contract. 3 more weeks of blood panels and herd checks, sleeping in a different room every night, rearranging beds and chairs and nightstands before I turned out the lights, breathing in irregular patterns until I fell asleep. I felt ridiculous. I felt insane, but I did it because on the nights I forgot, the nights I was too tired to rearrange, too exhausted to monitor my own breathing, the walls breathed back. Not every night, not predictably, but often enough that I could track a rough correlation. The more consistent my routine, the clearer the breathing. The more I disrupted my patterns, the fainter it became. On good nights, it was barely audible, a whisper at the edge of perception, easily mistaken for wind or plumbing, or the ordinary sounds of an old building settling. On bad nights, it was room 204 again, full and rhythmic, and accompanied by the dry whisper of pages turning. On those bad nights, I could feel the room reading me, not metaphorically, physically, a sensation like being measured not with instruments, but with attention, the way a tailor looks at you when they're estimating your dimensions without a tape. Every surface in the room became aware of where I was and how I was positioned, and I could feel the awareness as a faint pressure on every part of my body that was in contact with something solid, the mattress against my back, the pillow against my head, my feet against the sheets. Each point of contact was a data point, and the room, whatever projection of room 204 had followed me into this space, was collecting them. The contract ended in early November. I drove back to my apartment in Sheridan, and I stripped the place. Not emotionally, practically. I moved the bed to the opposite wall. I replaced the mattress. I bought new pillows, different firmness, different size. I changed the layout of every room, put the kitchen table where the couch had been, moved the couch to the bedroom, turned the apartment into a version of itself that I barely recognized. I set alarms to go off at random intervals during the night, so I'd never settle into a consistent sleep cycle. I ate at different times. I drove different routes to the grocery store. I was dismantling my own patterns one by one, and for a while, it worked. The breathing faded. November passed without a single incident. December was clean. By January, I had almost convinced myself that Carol had been right, that the sample had degraded, that room 204 had lost my frequency in the noise of a sufficiently disrupted life. On February 3rd, I came home from a supply run and found the green binder on my kitchen table. Not a copy. The binder. Carol's binder. The one he'd held against his chest. The one he'd kept beneath the counter at the Hargate Motor Lodge. Dark green cover, 3 rings, tabbed dividers labeled with year ranges. I recognized the scratch on the front cover where the lamination had peeled. I recognized the faint smell of old paper that rose from it when I opened the cover. It was the same binder, and it was open to a new section. The tab read 2024 to present. There was a single entry on the first page, written in handwriting. I didn't recognize not Carol's careful print, not any of the previous hands from the historical entries. This writing was small and dense and perfectly even, each letter the same height, each word the same spacing, as if it had been produced by a hand that had practiced this exact motion thousands of times. Guest, Nora Vasquez. Initial contact, October 11th. Duration of contact, approximately 12 minutes. Hallway proximity plus direct door contact. Sample quality, high. Spatial profile, 74% mapped. Projection capability, confirmed in secondary location, October 13th. Pattern disruption initiated by guest, November 1st. Sample degradation, partial. Current mapping, 51%. Note, guest has altered spatial patterns significantly. Read cannot be completed under current conditions. Recommendation, extend projection frequency to accelerate passive collection. Guest's disruption efforts reduce yield per contact, but do not eliminate contact. Full mapping estimated at current rate, 18 to 24 months. I read it 3 times. Then I turned the page. The next page was not an entry. It was a floor plan, my apartment, drawn to precise scale, every wall and doorway and window exactly where it should be, with my furniture layout the new layout, the one I'd created in November to disrupt my patterns, marked in fine pencil lines. Each piece of furniture was labeled not with its name, but with a percentage. The bed, 34%. The couch, 12%. The kitchen chair, 8%. The bathroom floor, 2%. It took me a moment to understand what the percentages meant. Then I looked at the entry again. Spatial profile, 74% mapped. The percentages on the floor plan were contribution values. Each surface I touched, each object I rested against, each point of contact between my body and the physical space of my apartment was contributing data to a cumulative map of how I exist inside a room. The bed was the largest contributor because I spent the most time in contact with it. The kitchen chair was lower because I moved around while sitting. The bathroom floor was negligible because I never stood in the same position twice. Room 204 was mapping me through my own furniture. I closed the binder. I picked up my phone. I called Carol's number. It rang 4 times. 5, 6. On the 7th ring, someone answered, but it wasn't Carol. It was breathing. The same rhythm, the same depth. Inhale, pause, exhale, pause. Coming through the phone speaker with a clarity that made it sound like the source was inches away. I listened for 10 seconds, 15, waiting for it to stop, waiting for Carol to pick up, waiting for anything human. Then, between breaths, a voice, not Carol's, not anyone's, a voice that sounded like it was being produced by the architecture of a room rather than by vocal cords, resonant, enclosed, carrying the faint echo of walls and ceiling and floor. Nora, it said, just my name, spoken with the same even spacing as the handwriting in the binder, each syllable measured, each sound placed with precision. I hung up. I called back the next day, and the next, and every day for a week. The number was disconnected, not busy, not ringing to voicemail, disconnected. The 3-tone sequence, an automated message, as if the Hargate Motor Lodge had never had a phone line. I drove down there. I need you to know that I drove down there, because I said at the beginning that anger was the thing keeping me from going back, and that's true now, but in February, it was the thing that drove me forward. I was furious. Furious at the room, at Carol, at the binder appearing in my apartment through means I could not explain, at the idea that something was mapping me without my consent and there was nothing I could do to make it stop completely. The Hargate Motor Lodge was closed, not abandoned closed. The sign was off. The office door was locked. The curtains on every ground floor room were drawn. Carol's trailer behind the building was gone. Not moved, gone. As if it had never been there. Just a rectangle of dead grass where something had blocked the light for a long time. I stood in the empty parking lot, and I looked up at the second floor. Room 204's window was the only one without drawn curtains. The glass was dark, but not the flat darkness of an empty room. It was the saturated darkness of a space that is occupied by something that absorbs light rather than reflecting it. And as I stood there, the curtain moved again. The same slow, settling adjustment I'd seen on the morning I left. The shift of fabric around a shape that was standing just behind it, looking down at me, patient and unhurried. I got back in my truck. I drove to Sheridan. I moved out of my apartment the next week. New town, new apartment, new furniture, everything new. I have not established a pattern. I don't sleep on the same side of the bed 2 nights in a row. I don't eat at the same time. I don't sit in the same chair. My life is a deliberate exercise in inconsistency, and most days it works, and the breathing stays faint, and the pages don't turn, and I can almost believe I'm winning. But the binder is still in my apartment, the new apartment. I didn't bring it. I left it in the old place on the kitchen table when I moved out, but it was on my kitchen counter when I came home on the 3rd day in the new place, open to the floor plan page, and the layout had been updated. New walls, new furniture, new percentages. The bed was at 9%. Everything else was below 5%. The mapping is still at 51%. It hasn't gone up. My disruptions are working, or at least they're holding, but it hasn't gone down either. Whatever room 204 read in those 12 minutes, my hand on its door, my weight on its hallway floor, my breath in its corridor it kept, and it will not give it back, and it is patient enough to collect the remaining 49%, 1 fraction of a percent at a time, over 18 to 24 months, or however long it takes, because the room has been doing this since 1979, and it has never been in a hurry. Carol told me the room doesn't need a manager to operate. He said it needs one to be selective. He's gone now. The trailer is gone. The motel is closed. And I have to believe that means the room is no longer being selective. That it is reading every space I enter, every surface I touch, every room I sleep in. Not because it's malicious, but because that's what it does. It reads, it maps, it files. And when the file is complete, the person becomes a function of the room, and the room becomes a record of the person. And the breathing never stops because the breathing is the reading, and the reading is the room. My mapping is at 51%. I check the binder every morning. The number hasn't changed in 3 weeks. I'm holding it there through sheer inconsistency, through the exhausting daily work of never being predictable, never settling, never letting any room learn the shape of me. But I'm tired. I am so tired. And some nights, when I lie in bed in a position I haven't used before, on a mattress I don't recognize, in a room I've rearranged for the 3rd time that week, I hear the faintest rhythm in the walls. Inhale, pause, exhale, pause, and it sounds like rest. It sounds like a room that knows exactly how I sleep and has arranged itself accordingly. And all I would have to do is close my eyes and breathe normally just once, just one full night of natural, unguarded sleep, and the number would climb, and the room would learn a little more, and I would feel more comfortable than I've felt in months. That's the thing no one tells you about being read. It doesn't feel like surveillance. It doesn't feel like violation. It feels like being known. And the longer you fight it, the more you realize that what you're fighting is the most attentive, patient, thorough version of recognition you've ever encountered. And the only thing standing between you and the most perfectly calibrated room you'll ever sleep in is the knowledge of what happens when the calibration is complete. I don't know what happened to Dale Hargate. I don't know if he's alive inside those walls, or if alive is even the right word for what he became. I don't know if the people marked as long-term occupants in that ledger are gone or preserved or something in between. I don't know where Carol went or whether he left voluntarily, or whether the room finally finished reading him after 19 years of proximity. I know that my mapping is at 51% and holding. I know that the binder updates itself. I know that room 204 doesn't need me to come back because it has already come to me, projected into every room I enter, collecting fractions of data through every surface I touch. And I know that last night, for the first time in weeks, the percentage changed. Not up, not down. The number was the same, 51%, but there was a new line beneath it, in that same dense, even handwriting. Guest has maintained disruption protocol for 4 months. Spatial profile holding at 51%. Projection has been expanded to secondary and tertiary locations. Passive collection rate, 0.3% per month at current disruption level. Estimated full mapping at sustained disruption, 13.5 years. Note, guests' disruption patterns are themselves becoming consistent. Disruption is a pattern. The room is now reading the disruption, 13.5 years. That's how long I can hold it off if I keep doing what I'm doing. And the room knows this, and it has written it down, and it is willing to wait because it waited 45 years for Dale Hargate, and it has waited through every guest who ever slept in its bed. And 13 years is nothing to something that breathes but does not age. I rearranged my apartment again this morning. New configuration, new sleep position, new everything. But I noticed something when I was moving the bed. The mattress was warm on the side I slept on last night. Not body heat warm. Warm the way room 204's door was warm when I pressed my hand against it. Warm from the other side. Warm from something leaning into the surface, reading what I left there, measuring the impression my body made in the fabric and the foam and the space between them. The room is in my mattress now. It's in my walls and my floor and my furniture and every surface I've touched since October. It's in every motel room between here and KC. It's in Gail's place, and it's in my truck, and it's in the chair I'm sitting in while I tell you this. And it's breathing right now. If you're quiet enough, you can hear it. I can